Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to begin by formally welcoming the new member from Regina Northeast. I also want to congratulate my colleagues, the new Minister of Highways and the new Minister of Agriculture on their respective new roles, as well as the member from Saskatoon University who assumes the role of our caucus chair, Mr. Speaker. As is customary, I would like to begin with a couple of thank yous. Firstly, to thank the good people of Regina University who put me in this seat, and it's really my sincere hope that they feel that they are very well represented in this place. I'm also able to do this job to the best of my ability because I have a very strong group of people who support me. I've thanked my Chief of Staff, Tessa Ritter, and my constituency assistant, Wendy Ward, many times for their ongoing support, and I do again now. However, I would also like to thank Linda Storty for stepping in at my constituency office to help out and going above and beyond. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that I have, and I know my colleague beside me might disagree, but I have the best ministerial office staff, I think, in the whole building. Every single day when I walk into this beautiful historic place, I feel blessed to work with Michelle and Dawn, who keep me on task and on a daily basis do some small act of kindness like say, "Hey, Minister, have you eaten?" Ashley, whose attention to detail on the comm side is really unrivaled, and Kirsten, who has a positive and upbeat disposition. These ladies are a fierce team, and I'm really blessed to have them. I also want to thank Mark, Tammy, David, and their teams in Advanced Education, Wes, Carrie, and their team at Innovation Saskatchewan, and Mari and Jackie at the Status of Women Office for their professionalism and the really great working relationship that we share. And most of all, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my kids, Cayman and Montana. My kids had the benefit of a mom who kind of worked her previous career at the university around their schedule, and so we developed a really close bond. And I had the privilege of being there for them for every sporting event and school commitment for many, many years. This has changed a bit since I got elected, as some of my colleagues will know. And while I work to get to as many games as I can, there's no question that the demands of our job has had an impact. Luckily, they are teenagers with cars and jobs and a social life, and sometimes they don't want me around all that much. But there's no question that this has been an adjustment for our family, and so I'm really grateful for the ongoing support that I get from them, and despite some bumps in the road, I'm pretty proud of the people that they've become. Both are very high-performing students and high-performing athletes, and people with good hearts, even if sometimes the state of their bedrooms would qualify for a season of hoarders. Now, with all the niceties addressed, Mr. Speaker, I'm feeling a little punchy today, and so I want to get to the issues at hand. Yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition asked, "When will the Premier get to work?" Now, Mr. Speaker, I generally sit quietly in my seat, but I almost laughed out loud at this. Our Premier has an exhausting schedule of constituency events, meetings, public appearances and speeches, trade negotiations, and economic lobbying efforts that outpaces any of us, because he is very committed to engaging with the people of this province at every single opportunity he can. Frankly, I doubt the Leader of the Opposition could keep up with the Premier's efforts to engage people all across this province on his best day, and certainly not from a skateboard. But not only that, Mr. Speaker, but to ask the question, in the context of challenging the Premier's efforts to establish trade agreements on behalf of the people of this province, as the new so-called critic for the economy, Mr. Speaker, speaks to exactly how out of depth the member opposite is on this very, very important file. We export 70% of what we produce in this province, Mr. Speaker. 70%. So, of course, the Premier of the province is focused on building trade agreements for our export markets, both interprovincially and internationally. Open access to markets through our trade agreements and Saskatchewan's ability to constantly add value and innovate to be globally competitive is fundamental. How else does the Leader of the Opposition think we pay for things like the 284-bed state-of-the-art Saskatchewan Hospital in North Battleford, which will help address significant mental health needs in this province? How else does the Leader of the Opposition think we pay for things like the Jim Pattison Children's Hospital, or the take-home naloxone kits for opioid addiction, or universal drug coverage for HIV medications? Surely The Leader of the Opposition values these investments and understands the critical connection between growing the economy and investment in the quality of life for people. We don't just grow the economy for the economy's sake, and never have. The history of our hinterland economy means that we are often at the mercy of forces outside of our control, and it has been the job of governments over the history of Saskatchewan to find ways to effectively lobby and build workarounds to adjust. This stems from the historical national energy policy to the wheat board, to today the imposition of the carbon tax or the inability to get goods to market due to rail backlogs, deteriorated highway infrastructure, or pipelines. A strong economy and a strong government in this province requires someone to stand up and aggressively lobby on behalf of our economy and our citizens in the face of this long-standing historical fact. And I believe our Premier is doing just that. The fact that the Leader of the Opposition doesn't seem to understand this underscores his lack of suitability for the job on this side of the Assembly. Now, building further, Mr. Speaker, on one of these important issues, the issue of transportation, I find it curious that the members opposite, 5 of whom are from the City of Regina, continue to attack the Regina Bypass project. This is the single largest infrastructure project ever in our province, which is almost complete, includes multiple interchanges, and is on time and on budget. It is most certainly not, as the member from Saskatoon Fairview argues, and I quote, a costly and failed mega project. I am glad, however, that she referred to it as a mega project. It includes 12 overpasses, 45 kilometres of new 4-lane highway, 21.4 kilometres of resurfaced 4-lane highways, almost 55 kilometres of new service roads, and the twinning of about 5 kilometres of Highway 6. As someone who has lived in Southwest Regina for most of my life, I can share with you that the traffic congestion at that end of this city has been a significant issue for residents and businesses for years. This has been magnified by the really big explosion of new communities in the Greens, the Creeks, now the towns, and the bedroom communities of Emerald Park, White City, Balgony, and Pilot Butte. And I would note there for the members opposite that part of the reason that housing starts are down is because there is an oversupply in the market as a result of overbilling. The vacancy rates here in Regina alone are 6.9%. The overall vacancy rate for the province, according to CMHC data, was 8.6%, and the national average for the same is 3.7%. At the same time, the province's population continues to grow, Mr. Speaker, something which it has done for 49 consecutive quarters, which is the fastest and most sustained period of population growth in 86 years. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist or even an economist to figure out what's going on here. But I digress. I took a look at the City of Regina's traffic flow map this year and noted that Victoria Avenue and Arcola, which had previously been the highest condensed urban flow arterial roads in the province, are significantly down since the bypass has been constructed. And this is important not just because of the impact on the commute of residents in Southeast Regina, but it is for 2 reasons. 1, for years we heard from frustrated businesses and the trucking associations about the challenges of transporting goods from one destination to the other and the bottleneck they encountered when they arrived at the outskirts of our city. Those trucks had to transport goods straight through town, which caused serious, inefficient delays. Our government's response to this issue is part of a larger response to transportation challenges we have as a province in getting our goods to market, whether by rail, by road, or yes, by pipeline. In this case, we are talking by road, and the Regina Bypass has been critical to providing the literal off-ramps to truckers transporting our goods to market so that they can get to their destination in an efficient manner. Lord only knows that we encounter enough other barriers when we want to get to ports or to rail lines with it. But the second more critical reason why I'm surprised that the members opposite rail against the Regina bypass is because of safety concerns, Mr. Speaker. The number of vehicle collisions and fatalities along Pilot Butte and Balgony interchanges, Mr. Speaker, are very well known. And indeed, the heavy volume of truck traffic going through roads that are already highly congested as a result of the rapid growth of Southeast communities was a very significant safety problem. In fact, Mr. Speaker, as was mentioned earlier, so significant was the safety problem of the high congestion of truck traffic into Regina that the member of Regina-Rosemont rose and petitioned this Assembly not once, not twice, but 80 times in the 27th sitting of the legislature, Mr. Speaker. 80 times. And not only did he petition 80 times, but he also did 2 member statements on the same issue. And I know he did this, Mr. Speaker, because he's a resident of the city and he knows the problem well. And I'm pleased to say that first responders, municipalities, and police are already telling us that safety has improved as a result of the Regina bypass. And now that the bypass is 90% complete, Mr. Speaker, is on time, has created 9,200 jobs with a GDP impact in this province of $942 million, and has dramatically improved safety, I find it curious that the new critic for the economy, the leader of the opposition, or at the very minimum, members who represent constituencies here in the city of Regina don't stand up and applaud this project for job creation, ensuring our goods get to market more efficiently, and improving safety and literally saving lives. It defies all good logic, Mr. Speaker. Now, members opposite also argue that there is no vision. But having a theme, dream, and deliver is really not enough. We do have a division to diversify our economy and build on the increasingly digital terrain that is the characteristic and hallmark of the fourth industrial revolution. Part of that, it requires investments in digital infrastructure that we are making. This year, SaskTel expanded its high-tech Fusion Internet to 35 additional rural locations in this province as part of a larger effort to increase 4G LTE coverage in 100 Saskatchewan communities. This focus is directly the result of 2 things. Firstly, the aggressive and sustained engagement that we have had with communities all over this province. And secondly, because we know that our economy will increasingly be built from digital infrastructure. Much of what is already being led by innovators in our agricultural sector in things like dock technologies, autonomous tractor, for example. The Minister of Education has also talked about the inclusion of coding in the K-12 curriculum, Mr. Speaker, so that we can ensure that our students have the tools of the future. And we have introduced the most aggressive angel investment tax credit in the country for technology startups, Mr. Speaker. The most recent data shows that the uptake on this program is very strong from both tech startups and from investors. Our government has supported the CoLabs incubator, Mr. Speaker, and in its first 15 months, the government has seen a very significant return on its investment. 52 startup companies have received programming support and over 800 hours of mentorship, and as a result, over $5 million in private investment have been leveraged and secured by those very same companies. We are working hard to grow our entrepreneurial ecosystem, Mr. Speaker, and to create opportunities for innovation so Saskatchewan can be the disruptors and not the disrupted. Of the major global disruptive trends in innovation, artificial intelligence, genomic research on both the plant resilience side and also on the health side, in advanced robotics, additive manufacturing, and both agricultural and precision healthcare, I'm happy to report that Saskatchewan is delivering through our sector entrepreneurs, industry leaders, and post-secondary researchers. You know, I recently had the opportunity to attend and make interventions on behalf of Canada at the Council of Ministers of Education Canada talks for the G20. And I'm so proud to say that Saskatchewan's vision on pathways, on innovation, on the role of education and linkages to the economy are in line with global thinking on these issues. And I'm so excited to realize the next few years of this government as we move forward on many of these fronts. Now, I think it's well known that I got involved in this party, Mr. Speaker, because I saw the investments that this government was making for people with disabilities, for women fleeing domestic violence, and for providing an environment where young people saw opportunities to grow and to pursue their dreams. 3/4 of all of our government expenditures go towards initiatives that directly impact the quality of life of people here in our province. We grow the economy so we can actually help people, Mr. Speaker. And there really have been tremendous investments in health, some of which I have discussed already. But what I think I'm most proud of are the investments this government has made on the issue of domestic violence. Now, I will say that I would prefer that we were not opening women's shelters, and I would prefer that we were not making changes to legislation with respect to domestic violence, so that because maybe there wouldn't actually be those problems anymore. But I am so grateful for the work that our government has done in these areas to help women and their children fleeing domestic violence situations. And here I think it's very important to highlight and emphasize the very strong role that our male colleagues have played in championing aggressive legislation on the Residential Tenancies Act, on initiating and leading the Domestic Violence Death Review Panel, on the expansion of interpersonal violence leave to include sexual violence of any kind, on changes to privacy legislation to prohibit revenge porn, and to introduce Clare's Law, the very first province in Canada to introduce this legislation. And just today, my colleague from Swift Current discussed the renovations in the Southwest Shelter. Mr. Speaker, these initiatives have all been done under the leadership of the current and former Ministers of Justice and Attorney General, male colleagues in our caucus that I am very, very proud of. I had hoped that there would be some recognition from the members opposite that while there's always more to do on this front, these are very powerful and important steps in the right direction. And they were steps largely taken by my male colleagues while walking miles in the red shoes. Now, there's so many more things I'd like to talk about in this speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker, but time and I'm sure the patience of my colleagues is wearing thin. Today, individualized home care options were announced by our government. And together with individualized funding for children with autism we've initiated, we're moving increasingly to focus on customized options for people, especially vulnerable people. And this, I'm sure you would agree, is a welcome move and a welcome change, and is in line, as a matter of fact, with global thinking about something that has been referred to as Society 5.0. Now, I applaud these initiatives, and I look forward to others as we continue to negotiate trade agreements, build and lobby for transportation infrastructure, so we need to get our goods to market, and oppose job-killing taxes, Mr. Speaker, so we have the economic performance to support all these initiatives. And so therefore, I'm very proud to stand with the Premier and my very distinguished colleague from Lumsden Morse in passing this motion to support this speech from the throne. I will not be supporting the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.